The night above Earth was silent when the signal came, a broken whisper traveling through static from a system thought long dead. It was a Valoran distress beacon crying across the void. Every human listening station caught the same haunting message. A single repeating phrase: "Help us, they have killed everyone aboard the Titan-class warship." TSV Resolute drifted beyond Mars orbit. When the transmission reached her bridge, the crew froze as the sound of a child's voice echoed through the comms. A tiny voice whispering the name of her mother again and again before the feed cut to silence. The comms officer Armand stared at the waveform, his heartbeat loud in his ears. He tried to trace the frequency. The origin flickered through storms of interference somewhere near the Valoran frontier worlds. He whispered to his captain that no civilian line could reach that far without deliberate relay. Someone had carried the message by hand before dying. Earth's Central Command confirmed the unthinkable. Within hours, the Galactic Council had declared the Valoran colonies as unstable and ordered them pacified under emergency law. 200,000 civilians gone in a single orbital strike. The Council called it a policing action. Their envoy spoke before the Senate, calm and cold, claiming Valoran ships had resisted inspection. The broadcast ended, and for the first time in decades, Earth's channels went dark. The silence that followed was heavier than war. 3 days later, the Terran fleet assembled above the moon. Thousands watched from cities below as the old war engines woke from hibernation. Titans carriers and escort fleets all aligning to one command. Earth had not fought an open war in a century, but the name Valoran carried a promise. They were humanity's first friends. Among the stars they had shared maps and food. When Earth ships first stumbled out of Sol, they had taught humans how to bend light and build shields, and now their ashes drifted in council space. The anger spreading across human colonies was not the fire of conquest. It was the cold rage of family betrayed. Armand stood at the Resolute's observation deck as the stars turned. He thought of the Valoran child's voice replaying in his headset. The captain approached and said, "The council thinks humans will protest and then fade. They have forgotten what silence means in our language." Armand asked what we will say to them. The captain turned toward the comm panel and said, "We will not say anything, we will answer." When the message finally left Earth, it carried no threat, only coordinates of every Valoran system marked with emergency rescue tags. It told all ships in range that any who interfered with human rescue operations would be treated as combatants. It was not bravado. It was law. The message ended with a single phrase: "Humanity stands for Valoran, justice will come." The Galactic Council met in haste. Their admirals laughed at human arrogance. The queen of the core empires called Earth sentimental and weak. She believed humans would beg for trade routes and forgiveness once the Council embargoed their colonies. None of them understood that Earth had stopped needing their markets long ago. On the 5th day after the massacre, the Resolute launched from lunar dock. Her engines burned blue brighter than sunrise as she cut toward the frontier. Behind her followed 3 more Titan-class warships. The Aegis, the Dawnfire, and the Iron March civilian fleets cheered. As they passed, every port opened its lights in salute. No one called them conquerors, they called them guardians. Armand sat at his console recording one last personal note. He spoke softly to the log, saying to any Valoran survivor who hears this, "We are coming. Do not lose hope. The stars remember who you are, and so do we." The Resolute crossed the solar boundary and entered the dark lanes between worlds. The crew watched as Earth faded behind them, small and fragile but steady in its glow above. Them the stars waited, silent witnesses to what was about to begin. Because the humans were not just fighting for allies. They were fighting for the promise that mercy still meant something in the galaxy that had forgotten it, and the moment the first gate opened, everyone who listened across the void understood that Earth was awake again, and the age of quiet obedience was over. The Queen and the cover-in, the golden chamber of the Galactic Council. The air shimmered with heat from thousands of projection lights. Each world sent its voice, yet only one spoke loud enough to command them all: the alien queen of the core empires. Her throne shaped like the bones of extinct stars, her armor glimmering with living metal that pulsed with her breath. She listened to the report of the Valoran purge with cold satisfaction. Her ministers bowed low, reciting casualty counts, as if reading trade numbers. She asked if Earth had responded, her tone neither afraid nor amused. A soft hiss followed, as the envoy of the war faction stepped forward and said, "Humans have sent a message to the stars declaring solidarity with the Valoran survivors." The Queen tilted her head slightly, her long tendrils brushing against her crown, and she said, "Humans love their words, they think words make them strong. Perhaps we will remind them what silence costs." She rose from the throne, her steps echoing across the marble floor. Her generals followed, cautious of her mood. The Valoran had been troublesome for years, questioning the Council's decrees and hiding behind treaties. The massacre was supposed to send a lesson to smaller races, that obedience was the price of survival. But now Earth had chosen to interfere, and the Queen did not tolerate defiance. From New Blood, she ordered the Intelligence Division to erase all transmissions linking the Council to the attacks. Every archive, every network, even Valoran's own planetary cores were to be wiped. The universe would remember nothing but the official report. She said no one would care about a few lost colonies, not when trade must flow, and the outer fleets must be fed, far away in a secret chamber beneath the ruins of Valoran Prime. A young princess named Lisa crawled from the ashes, her skin burned, her eyes red from smoke. She had escaped the first bombardment through the drainage tunnels of the central spire, clutching a single crystalline data core. It contained orders signed by the Council herself. She had proof that the purge was deliberate, proof that could change the balance of the galaxy. But she was alone, hunted and bleeding. She found an abandoned shuttle still running on auxiliary power. She connected the core to its transmitter and searched for any signal strong enough to cross the void. When she found the faint human frequency used by the Terran deep listening posts, she wept for the first time in days and sent her message. She begged them for help. She told them the truth. Back in the council hall, a shadow captain entered, through the side gates, kneeling before the Queen, his armor black and etched with burning veins. His name was Kareth, and he lived for her command. He was the kind who saw mercy as infection. She looked down at him and said, "The Valoran princess escaped. She carries the data we buried." He lifted his head, his eyes red and steady, and said, "I will find her, my queen." The Queen smiled and placed her hand over his forehead, whispering, "Bring me her core, and the proof erase her name. And if the humans shelter her, make them vanish too." As Kareth's fleet departed, the Queen turned to the counselors and ordered them to declare Earth a suspect in the Valoran rebellion. The motion passed without argument. Every Empire's representative nodded in fear. None of them wanted to challenge her. She said, "Prepare a task force near the Soul Gate. We will watch what humans do next if they step beyond their boundary. We strike." The message of accusation spread fast across the galaxy. Human ships were labeled aggressors. Their trade convoys halted at every checkpoint. Yet on Earth, the response was not panic, it was quiet focus. The Terran fleet increased patrols. The Titan-class warships continued forward, and among them, the TSV Resolute held the lead, its captain studying the star maps and watching for strange movements. Armin sat beside his console, reading fragments of intercepted council chatter. He noticed a pattern: repeated coordinates near the edge of the Orion Drift. He understood that someone or something was moving in secret. He told his captain that an enemy fleet might already be shadowing them. The captain ordered a blackout to hide their signal, and they vanished from common scanners. The humans were hunters now, moving through the dark lanes of hyperspace like wolves. Lysa's shuttle, meanwhile, drifted through dying power cells and broken systems. Her vision faded. She saw flashes of light as enemy ships closed in. She whispered to herself that humans would hear her before the end. She sent one last coded burst containing her coordinates toward Sol, then slumped against the cold glass as her shuttle spun into the dark. Kareth's fleet locked onto the signal. Moments later, his ships formed a net around the drifting vessel. His plan was to destroy her and make it appear as if humans had done it. He ordered the weapon charge, but something unexpected happened. The space around his fleet flickered, a shadow, like the mouth of a storm. Opened, the Resolute dropped from warp directly in front of him, her hull shining silver blue like the old Terran oceans before pollution. Her engines hummed low and steady. Not a weapon fired yet. Kareth saw hundreds of turrets tracking his formation, and he realized too late that humans had found the princess first. On board the Resolute, Armin guided the tractor beams toward the broken shuttle, Lysa's signal weak but alive. The human crew moved in silence, their faces lit by the soft glow of monitors outside. The stars stretched endless and still somewhere. Deep in the galaxy, the Queen watched the data feed and whispered into the air, "Let them save her. It will make their fall more painful." And as the human warship turned toward the gate with the rescued shuttle locked in its hold, the galaxy took its first breath before the storm. The Council believed it controlled the story. The Queen believed she had sealed the truth, but in that moment, a new voice had entered the dark. A human voice, calm, steady, and unafraid, ready to speak for the dead and for what was yet to come. Gate of fire, the Sol Gate shimmered in the void like a scar carved into space, a wound that never healed. It was humanity's oldest gateway, a relic from the first age of expansion when Terran explorers cut their way through, folded gravity, and found the worlds beyond the Milky Veil. Now it burned again under siege. The Galactic Council had sent its so-called peacekeeping fleet to block the gate under the excuse of investigation, but every human officer knew what it really was. It was intimidation disguised as order. The fleet was huge, lined with ships older and larger than mountains. Their banners glowed with the insignia of the Queen's empire, gold and crimson streaks across endless black. Their leader, Admiral Valoran, had served the Queen for decades and believed the war would end in a single hour. He had studied the humans and called them emotional, undisciplined, and predictable. Far beyond Neptune orbit, the Titan-class warship TSV Resolute slid into silence. Her lights dimmed her hull, reflecting no heat, her presence hidden under the shadow of a dead moon. Captain Arya stood at the forward deck, her face calm as the stars drifted. She was not a hero or a legend. She was a soldier who had seen what the Council did to Valoran and had chosen to fight without rage, without mercy. Armin sat at the comm panel, listening to faint frequencies, scanning every whisper from the gate ahead. He picked up the noise of 1,000 voices, alien languages mixed into chaos, orders being shouted to align the blockade. When he told the captain that the Council fleet was moving into full formation, she only nodded and said, "They are waiting for us," inside the hold of the Resolute. The Valoran Princess Lysa slowly opened her eyes. The medics had wrapped her burns in pale silver cloth. She saw the human symbol on the walls, an old Earth crest carved into steel. She asked the officer beside her why the humans saved her. He answered softly, "Because you called for help, and because your people were our friends." She looked at him in disbelief. She had never seen such quiet resolve in a soldier's eyes. She asked if they feared the Council. He smiled slightly and said, "Fear is for those who have nothing to protect." Outside, the gate began to pulse with violent light, each cycle stronger than the last, as if the fabric of reality was resisting what the Council was forcing through. Their ships lined up in concentric rings, each ring holding hundreds of cruisers there, weapons aimed inward, ready to annihilate anything that passed through without permission. But something strange began to happen. The gate flickered, then dimmed. The signal collapsed, and for a heartbeat, every scanner across the fleet went blind. The alien officers shouted for power restoration. Then out of that blind zone appeared a shadow, massive and silent. The Resolute emerged from the dark. Every ship in the Council formation froze. The human warship was not broadcasting any identification, not asking for clearance. It was moving as if it owned the path through the gate. Admiral Valoran ordered the nearest ships to power weapons, but before they could even lock target, the Resolute released a low-frequency pulse that cut through their communication lines, disabling the targeting systems without damage. It was an ancient Earth trick they called a silent roar, a wave of magnetic noise that bent sensors and made machines forget themselves. Valoran stared at his screen and saw his entire fleet blinking red. He shouted into the void, demanding a response from the human flagship captain. Arya opened the comms channel and her voice spread across every frequency of the blockade, clear and steady. She said, "This is Captain Arya of the Terran. Starship Resolute, you are holding the route to the Valoran refugee systems. This gate is no longer under your command. Lower your weapons and prepare for inspection by order of the Terran Council of Defense." Valoran laughed at her demand and said, "Human, you are outnumbered 10 to 1. Surrender your vessel and we may spare your crew." Her reply was simple and calm. We do not surrender to murderers. Armin watched as the bridge lights dimmed, the tactical screens filled with motion, hundreds of red icons circling them, but still they did not fire. Instead, the Resolute launched small spheres of light into the void, decoy drones shaped like ghost ships. They split and multiplied across radar signatures, confusing every targeting system. The enemy opened fire. Thinking they were surrounded, beams of energy crossed and collided, striking their own allies. Explosions rippled across the blockade. The humans did not celebrate. They moved with purpose and precision. Their goal, not destruction, but exposure. Every shot fired by the Council was being recorded, transmitted back to every colony, every port, every neutral world in the chaos. Lisa stepped onto the bridge, her face pale but her eyes bright. She saw how the humans fought, how their captain refused to shoot first even when surrounded. She whispered that the galaxy had never seen a power like this, not because of their weapons, but because of their restraint. The captain looked at her and said, "We do not fight to rule. We fight, so no one else rules by fear." As the smoke cleared, the Council's flagship lay crippled, its shields cracked but still alive. Voran's voice returned to the calm, his tone no longer mocking. He demanded to know what humanity wanted. Arya looked at Armin and nodded. He opened the broadcast channel and said, "We want the truth. You will release all data regarding the Valoran massacre to the neutral archives, and stand down. If you refuse, we will bring light to your every crime." The channel fell, silent for a long moment, then Voran's laughter returned. He said, "The Queen does not answer to humans. Your courage will end with your breath." The fleet began to reform, but now everyone across the galaxy had seen the transmission. They had seen the Council fire first and the humans stand calm before them, as the Resolute turned away to regroup near the rescue corridor. Armin looked out the viewport and whispered that this was only the beginning. He could feel the pulse of the stars around him, as if space itself was waiting for what came next, and deep within that silence the name Earth began to travel through channels, not as a planet, but as a warning, a promise that justice had found its voice again, and it spoke in the language of resolve, the rescue, and the oath. The corridors of the Resolute glowed in dim red as damage reports echoed across the decks. The battle at the gate had shaken the crew but not broken them. The air hummed with energy from overworked engines, and the scent of ionized metal drifted through every passage. Armin moved between consoles, rerouting power and sealing hull breaches. He could still hear the ghostly cries from the Valoran refugees who had been trapped in their crippled shuttles outside. Now they floated somewhere amid the wreckage, silent lights blinking in the dark. The captain's voice carried through the bridge, steady and cold. "We will retrieve them all before we retreat. No one gets left behind." Lisa stood near the viewport, wrapped in a human cloak, her golden skin marked with burns, her eyes distant as if still seeing the destruction of her world. She watched the human crew move with practiced calm, each person following orders without chaos, without anger. She whispered to herself that humans fought like storms but rescued like healers. When the captain ordered the launch of the boarding teams, Armin volunteered instantly, his hands still shaking from adrenaline. She nodded and said, "You know what we're rescuing," he answered quietly. "Lives, not trophies." The boarding shuttles launched into the debris field, engines burning blue against the black void. Broken Valoran ships drifted everywhere, their hulls torn open by Council fire. Armin guided his shuttle toward the largest wreck. The sensors showed faint life signs, but the oxygen levels were collapsing inside. He could see bodies floating in slow motion, children clutching shattered helmets. His stomach tightened, yet he kept his focus. When the shuttle latched onto the airlock, he and his team forced the door open. The silence hit them harder than the cold. There was no sound except their own breathing. They moved through the dark, carrying light beacons through corridors filled with ash. They found survivors, hidden behind a collapsed bulkhead, weak and frightened but alive among them. An elderly Valoran commander who still wore his insignia, though half-burned. He looked at the human suits approaching and raised his weapon. Armin took off his helmet, showing his face, and said, "We are here to help, not to harm." The old commander stared in disbelief. He had expected soldiers of the Council, not humans. He lowered his weapon and whispered, "We thought you would never come." Armin replied, "You called. We listened. That's what allies do. back aboard the Resolute. The rescued Valorans were carried to the med bay. Lysa ran to her people, tears mixing with soot on her face. She took the commander's hand and promised that his crew was safe. The man whispered that the Queen's agents had planted recorders across the fleet to twist any rescue into proof of human aggression. The captain heard this and ordered the communications deck to record every moment of the rescue as proof of their conduct. Armin worked for hours transferring the footage into secured files. He saw the faces of the rescued children smiling weakly under human blankets, and for a moment, the war felt smaller than the kindness in those eyes. When the last shuttle docked, the alarms blared again. Long-range scans showed new enemy signatures. The fanatic Captain Kareth was approaching with his Black Fleet. His ships carried no identification, only hunger for destruction. He was determined to erase the evidence of the Valoran survivors before they could speak. The Resolute's shields were still weak and half the weapons offline. The captain knew they could not win a direct fight. She ordered the evacuation shuttles prepared for the refugees, but Armin stepped forward and said, "If we run, they will destroy the evidence. If we stay, we can transmit everything." The captain looked at him and said, "If we stay, we die." He answered, "Maybe, but the truth will live." Lysa stood beside them, her voice calm and clear. She said, "My people died because the galaxy forgot to care. If I die now, it will not matter. But if I speak and the worlds hear me, maybe the Queen will feel fear for the first time." She turned to Armin and said, "If you can send my message, I will tell them everything." He nodded and said, "Then let's make the universe listen." As Kareth's fleet approached, the Resolute cut its engines, drifting in the void like a corpse waiting to be looted. The enemy ships moved closer, scanning for signs of life, unaware that every human system was redirecting power to a single transmission array. Armin worked the controls, his hands trembling, while the captain and crew held their positions. Kareth ordered his gunners to open fire just as Lysa began to speak, her voice carrying through every open frequency in the sector. She told the truth of the Valoran massacre, how the Council had signed the order, how the Queen herself had marked their coordinates and smiled as the worlds burned. The speech reached trading ships, smugglers, civilian channels, and military command posts before the first enemy round struck. The Resolute shook under the barrage, metal screamed, and the lights flickered. Armin refused to stop until the transmission bar reached full upload. When the final packet sent, he turned to the captain and said, "Done." She smiled for the first time since the war began, and ordered all hands to brace. The ship's defensive grid activated with a roar of magnetic energy, forming a wall of blue light around the hull. The enemy fire scattered uselessly into sparks. When the barrage ended, the Council fleet withdrew, confused by the broadcast. Every world in the network was replaying the Valoran testimony. The image of Lysa burned across their screens. The Queen's secret was broken forever. The captain turned to her crew and said, "The galaxy has heard us. We do not fight for revenge. We fight for the truth that no world is small enough to silence." The surviving Valorans knelt before the humans, but Arya the captain lifted them up and said no, kneeling between friends. Lysa placed her hand over her heart and spoke the words that would be remembered for centuries. "I swear, the oath of stars, as long as Valoran breathes, we will stand, beside Earth in light or in shadow." Armin felt the weight of her words settle over the bridge, and in that moment, the war changed from a cry for vengeance to a vow of unity, one that would echo through every corner of the galaxy, where the weak still prayed for someone to answer. The knife in the dark. The night after the transmission, the Resolute drifted in the calm between storms, its engines humming softly, while the wounded slept, and the survivors whispered prayers of gratitude across the decks. The galaxy was no longer silent. Every major channel replayed Lysa's message, the image of her burned face and steady eyes traveling from core to rim worlds, shaking old empires that believed truth could be buried yet far beyond the reach of their broadcast. The Queen's dread palace stirred with quiet rage. Her ministers spoke in low voices, fearing her wrath for revealing weakness to the humans. She stood before her war table, tracing the edges of the star map with her claws, and said, "They think they have won, but they do not see the knife waiting in the dark, in a hidden chamber of her fleet." The fanatic Kareth floated in meditation, his ship, the Obsidian Crown, gliding through shadow space. His orders were simple. Destroy the evidence. Destroy the witnesses and erase the Resolute from history. He had failed once, and failure to the Queen meant redemption through death or victory. There was no third path. He whispered ancient words from the war codes of his ancestors as his ship released a small black capsule that drifted silently into the void. It was no weapon of fire. It was worse, it carried a seed of dark matter, a device that could ignite within a gravity field and mimic the energy signature of a human fusion core. Once detonated, it would look to the galaxy like Earth's own ship had annihilated a refugee fleet on board. The resolute Armin woke from uneasy dreams. The ship's alarms were silent, but something felt wrong. He stared at the flickering data lines and saw a pulse too regular to be natural. He called the captain and said, "There is a signal in the dark moving with us." She joined him at the console, watching the invisible thread of energy weaving through space. It was a shadow following there. "Wake," she ordered scans, and the readings came back as a dead fragment of metal. But Armin shook his head. He knew that signature. It was deliberate. It was bait. He said, "Someone is painting us for the cameras. They are setting us up to be the villains." The captain gathered the officers in the command room, the air heavy with tension. The Valoran survivors stood at the edge, listening as humans debated their next move. If they broadcast again, the Queen would call it confession. If they stayed silent, the world would believe the lie. Lysa stepped forward and said, "The Council's strength is control of the story. If we speak with truth, they lose it forever." Arya looked at her and said, "The truth will not save us from a bomb if it reaches our hull." Armin spoke up, saying, "Maybe we can turn their weapon against them." The crew turned to him, and he explained that if they vented their reactor in the exact opposite frequency, they might push the false signal into open space where it would detonate. Harmlessly, the maneuver could kill them. If mistimed, the pressure wave could tear the ship in half. There was silence. Then the captain said, "Humanity was born in risk. We light fires where others fear the dark. Prepare the venting sequence." Armin nodded, his throat tight with fear. But he worked quickly, entering the calculations by hand. The systems protested the danger, but he overrode them one by one. The ship's hull glowed red as energy built up within the core. Every corridor vibrated with power. The refugees held onto rails, praying to gods that had long been silent, and even Lysa closed her eyes, whispering a promise to her lost world that she would not let their story die. In lies, Kareth watched from his command seat as the detonator approached, the Resolute. His sensors marked the moment the signal connected. He smiled coldly and said, "Burn them to silence," but before his words finished, the dark matter seed exploded. Too soon pushed out of range by a sudden surge of magnetic energy, the blast consumed his forward scouts and shattered his sensors. His bridge went dark. His smile vanished, replaced by disbelief. His prey had survived the knife on the Resolute. The deck shook violently. The lights flared and every panel went dead. The ship drifted, powerless for long minutes, then slowly the auxiliary systems came online. The crew exhaled as the captain looked around and asked for casualties. Minimal, came the reply, though half the weapons grid was now gone. They had survived, but the cost was severe. The Queen would not forgive this failure. Armin sat slumped against his console, sweat dripping from his face. He had seen the numbers. He knew the odds had been impossible, yet somehow the stars had bent their way. Lysa walked onto the bridge and looked at the damaged screens. She said quietly, "The galaxy saw the explosion. They will believe it was the Council's trap, not yours." The captain turned to her and said, "Perhaps, but the Queen will come now. She cannot afford patience." Lysa replied, "Then we end her patience." Back in the heart of the Empire, the Queen stared at the news feed showing the failed detonation. Her claws dug into the throne. Her voice a low hiss. "Prepare the dreadnought," she said. "If the humans want justice, I will bring." Then my own Kareth crawled before her, begging for one more chance. She lifted him by the throat with her tail and whispered, "You had your chance now. Watch as I erase their sun while her fleets gathered." The Resolute repaired what it could. The crew knew the next battle would decide everything. The human fleet sent encrypted orders to every allied ship. The message contained only 3 words: stand and hold. And as the shadows of the Queen's armada spread across the void, Armand looked out, the viewport, and said softly, "The dark has teeth, but so do we." And the stars seemed to flicker in agreement, as if the universe itself was holding its breath before the final storm that would decide whether light or silence ruled the age to come. Starborn. Wake! The wrecked ship floated like a wounded animal in the dark sea of space, its metal bones humming with tired energy. Yet inside, the resolute heart still burned. The crew worked without sleep, repairing ruptures, sealing decks, replacing the wounded. With the able, there was no time to rest. The Queen's dreadnought was coming, and the Council had unleashed its full armada across the outer colonies to finish what the massacre began. Captain Aria stood at the bridge, surrounded by flickering holograms, her eyes scanning the incoming reports one by one. Every allied world that had received Lisa's broadcast was rising, small ships, tiny militias, even mining drones joining together, forming what the human networks began to call the Wake, a wave of defiance. Moving toward Solar Man sat at his console, hearing the chatter of hundreds of untrained voices across open channels. He tried to bring order, but the sound of courage filled the comms. Miners from Jupiter, freighters from Mars, and old civilian patrols, all declaring they would defend the gate alongside the Resolute. It was madness, but it was also something greater. It was unity born in the ashes of fear. The captain looked at Armand and said, "It begins." He nodded, knowing that this was not just war, this was a reckoning far away. The Queen's dreadnought emerged from fold space, the leviathan of her empire forged from the cores of dead suns, its hull shimmering like molten gold surrounded by black clouds of escort ships. Her voice echoed across the command decks of every fleet she commanded. "Bring me their world, their ship, and their truth. I will crush their words beneath silence." She had never faced an enemy that refused to kneel. She believed that fear was eternal, that hope was a disease yet. As her fleet advanced, the communications grid filled with something she did not expect: laughter and songs from 1,000 human pilots and Valoran refugees, singing the same phrase. "We are the Wake on the Resolute." Lisa stood beside the viewport, her eyes reflecting the swirl of light around the gate. She wore a human flight suit now marked with both insignias of Earth and Valoran. She asked Armin if humans always fought this way. He smiled and said no. Sometimes worse. She laughed, softly, but her laughter carried a tremor. She knew what was coming. He told her that if she wanted to survive, she should go to the secondary transport. But she refused, saying, "If I die running, my voice dies with me, and my people need to see me stand." As the Allied flotilla formed, the Resolute began to move, its damaged engines roaring to life, its hull patched with parts from rescue ships and drones. It was no longer just a warship. It was a symbol, the heart of a movement. Captain Aria addressed the fleet with a calm voice, saying, "To all who hear me, you are not soldiers, you are witnesses. If we fall, the galaxy will know how we stood. If we live, they will know how we fought. Hold your line and remember, we are the voice of those who were silenced." The Queen's dreadnought opened its hangars, releasing waves of hunter drones, black wings spreading across the void. The human fleet fired in coordinated bursts, weaving magnetic nets that trapped entire formations. The space around the gate became a storm of fire and color. But through the chaos, the Resolute pushed forward, its shields flaring blue like the glow of an ocean against the night. Armin monitored the energy readings and saw something strange. The gate itself was responding to their presence, its gravitational field pulsing like a heartbeat. He whispered to the captain that it was alive. Aria understood immediately. The gate was built on old Valoran technology fused with early Terran code. It responded to emotion as much as energy. She ordered all ships to synchronize their signals into harmony. Not for attack, but for resonance. The frequencies aligned into a single tone, a sound that rolled through the void like a chorus. The enemy ships faltered as their sensors failed to process the vibration. The Queen's dreadnought slowed its advance, for the first time her commanders confused. She hissed in fury, demanding explanations. Lisa stepped forward, her eyes glowing faintly. The Valoran gene light awakening, she touched. The console and the gate responded. Her people had built it to protect life, not destroy it, and now it was remembering its purpose. She spoke into the comms, saying, "All ships lower weapons for 10 breaths. We will not let them use our creation for slaughter." The captain obeyed without hesitation. The fleet held its fire. And in that silence, something magnificent happened. The gate began to project light waves of pure white energy sweeping across the battlefield. It did not destroy but revealed every hidden weapon, every cloaked vessel, every false signal in the Queen's fleet. The galaxy watched through countless relays as the truth unfolded. The Council's deception laid bare for all to see their secret drones, their false flags, their forged transmissions, everything exposed under the gate's light. The Queen screamed in rage, ordering full assault, but her fleets hesitated. Commanders questioning orders, citizens broadcasting demands for truth across their worlds. Her control was slipping. Ria gave one final order to her crew. She said, "We cannot defeat her by fire, only by truth. Hold position and open every channel. Send her own commands back to her worlds." Armin's hands flew across the controls, sending the recordings of the Queen's lies to every planet within range. It was not just war anymore, it was revelation. The Dreadnought's guns charged, but half her escorts turned away, refusing to fire upon the humans. Lysa looked out and said, "It has begun the age of silence ends today." The Queen's ship fired a single massive beam that tore through space and struck the Resolute square in the hull. The decks shook, the lights dimmed, but the ship did not break. The captain stood firm, her voice steady and clear, saying, "We are still here." And the stars heard her words echo through every system in the galaxy. And for the first time in centuries, the Empire trembled, not from force but from faith. When Earth spoke, the battlefield around the Sol Gate burned like a living sun. Debris and shattered ships drifted through the void, while the glow of the gate spread into every direction. The human and Valoran alliance held their fragile line between chaos and annihilation. The Queen's dreadnought loomed ahead, its massive form casting a shadow over everything. Light from its engines glared like the eyes of a god, furious that mortals dared to defy her on the bridge of the Resolute captain. Aria stood in silence as the damage reports poured in. The hull was cracked. The main reactor was bleeding power and the communication array barely alive yet. Her voice remained calm. She looked across the bridge at her crewmen and women who had stood against the strongest empire in history and said, "We do not fall here. This is our stand." Armin sat at his console, listening to the voices flooding through the comms, old miners, fighters, traders, Valoran survivors, all calling for guidance, asking if the Resolute still lived. He answered each message with the same words, "We live, hold the line," every time he said it. His chest tightened with pride and fear. He knew the Dreadnought's next strike would finish them, but still he refused to look away. Lysa stood beside him, her face streaked with ash, her eyes glowing with the same faint light that had awakened the gate. She said, "The Queen will not stop until we silence her ourselves." Armin nodded and said, "Then let us speak louder." Inside the Dreadnought, the Queen walked through her command chamber, her steps slow, her tail dragging across the floor. She could hear the chaos among her fleet officers whispering rebellion, some refusing orders, others fleeing into warp corridors. She raised her hand and the room fell silent. She gazed out into the stars and said, "They think this is about truth or mercy. They think the weak can defy the strong. But I am the silence that built this galaxy, and I will remind them who commands it." She activated the main cannon, the energy field swallowing light itself. Her ship prepared to fire on the Resolute. Aria knew what was coming. She turned to her crew and said, "When she fires, we return. Not with rage, but with truth. All channels open. Every world will hear us." Armin opened the transmission grid, rerouting the ship's last power cells into the comm array. Lysa placed her hand on the console and added her own pulse to the signal, her voice joining his. They broadcast together not a message of victory, but of defiance. To every planet, every city, every outpost, the sound carried a simple message. "This is Captain Aria of the Terran starship Resolute and Princess Lysa of Valoran. We stand at the gate of Sol before the Queen of the Council. She demands silence. We answer with truth. Humanity did not start this war, but we will end it not through conquest, but through courage, you who serve the Council. Look at what she has done to your worlds, to your people, and choose your side. The gate will remember your names." As the words echoed across the galaxy, the Queen fired the cannon, a wave of red energy bursting forward, a storm that could erase moons. The crew of the Resolute braced for the end, but the gate shimmered, responding again to the voice of its builders. The beam hit the field and bent around, it refracting into the void instead of destruction. Light scattered like rainbows across the stars. The dreadnought's energy recoiled back through its own core, tearing its hull open from within. The explosion rolled through the fleet, blinding sensors and shaking the void itself. The Queen fell to her knees inside her burning ship, her empire collapsing in screams and static. She looked toward the image of Earth on her cracked display and whispered, "How can they keep standing?" "What are they?" Arya's voice came through the open channel, soft but steady. "We are what you made us when you tried to break us. We are the echo of every promise kept. We are the Starborn." Her dreadnought broke apart into silent fragments, drifting into the glow of the gate. Her command fleet scattered. Some surrendered. Some fled into exile. None dared fire again. The war was over. Not because Earth destroyed its enemies, but because the truth had broken their chains. The Terran and Valoran alliance became a symbol that could not be erased. Hours later, the battlefield was quiet. The surviving ships of the Allied fleet floated together, their lights flickering like candles in a storm. The Resolute hung at the center, scarred but alive, her decks filled with exhausted laughter and tears. Armand sat at his console recording the final log. He spoke slowly, his voice heavy but peaceful. "This is Lieutenant Armand of the Resolute. The war is over, the Queen is gone, the Council will rebuild, but it will not be the same anymore today. The galaxy learned that even the smallest voice can carry farther than the loudest weapon, and when Earth spoke, the stars listened." Lisa walked to the viewport where the glow of the gate still lingered. She placed her hand against the glass and whispered to the spirits of her people. "They are avenged, but not by hate, by truth." She turned to Arya and said, "What will humans do now?" The captain looked at the planet below their home, blue and bright among the dust of war, and said, "We will rebuild and remember." As the Resolute turned toward Earth, the fleet followed behind, thousands of ships, scarred yet shining, carrying survivors, refugees, and new allies. The gate closed slowly behind them, sealing the light like a promise that peace would hold for a while longer. The galaxy would tell their story for generations, the day when the Valoran were saved, the day when the Queen fell, the day when the humans spoke not in anger but in justice. And as the stars faded behind their wake, the ship's engines flared one last time, and Armin whispered into the silence, "We were never born for conquest. We were born to rise every time we were told to kneel." And now the universe knows what that means, because when Earth speaks, even gods listen. When Earth spoke forever, the galaxy held its breath as silence stretched across the void. The remnants of the Queen's dreadnought drifted like shadows of a nightmare. Her command fleet scattered, some surrendering to the Terran and Valoran alliance, others fleeing into unknown corridors of space unmarked by stars. The Resolute floated at the center of it all, her hull scarred and glowing, faintly from overworked shields, her engines pulsing with tired energy. Yet within the ship, every heart beat strong with the knowledge that no force could break what truth had built. Armin moved through the bridge corridors, his feet barely touching the deck. He watched the crew tending the wounded, distributing water and food, recording every word and every image to be sent to the archives of every free world. He felt the weight of the past weeks pressing down, yet it was a weight he carried. Proudly, the Valoran survivors gathered around him, whispering names of their lost kin, holding hands and murmuring prayers of thanks, their eyes reflecting both sorrow and hope. Lisa stood at the viewport, her hands pressed to the glass, watching the stars drift silently past. She whispered promises to her people that their lives and memories would be remembered not by death but by courage. Captain Arya stood tall at the helm, her gaze locked on the horizon where the Council's fleets once dared to threaten the gate. She raised her hand to the comms and spoke softly, but every planet and station within reach heard the words, "Humanity did not start this war, but we end it not with vengeance, but with justice." And the galaxy listened across. The void signals rippled outward, every relay carrying the images of the rescued, the footage of the Queen's lies, and the testimonies of the Valoran survivors. It was not a broadcast of power, but a voice of unity and honor. The gate pulsed once, more responding to the echo of every human and Valoran heartbeat. It projected waves of energy that gently swept across the battlefield, illuminating every ship, every survivor, every hidden camera, exposing all lies and deception that the Council had tried to hide. The Queen's influence crumbled without fire, without conquest. The truth alone had pierced the Empire's armor, and the galaxy understood that restraint and courage were mightier than any fleet. The Allied ships moved together, as one, a constellation of light and life marking the dawn of a new era. Armin returned to the observation deck with Lisa beside him. He watched the blue of Earth slowly growing larger through the viewport, the planet that had birthed their courage, their hope and their resolve. It shone brighter than any star in the sky. And he whispered into the comms that this day would be remembered not for the battles nor the destruction, but for the voices that refused to be silenced. The princess nodded, her eyes glistening with tears. She said, "We will carry this story to every world," and the stars around them seemed to shimmer in acknowledgement, as if the universe itself approved of their vow. The crew began to sing softly, the old songs of Earth, and Valoran intertwined melodies of grief and joy echoing through the corridors. The wounded smiled. The survivors clutched each other, and the light of the stars danced across the hull of the Resolute. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy was quiet, not with fear, but with understanding. The weight of tyranny had lifted, and a new age of hope had begun. As the ship entered Sol orbit, the humans and Valoran worked together to repair colonies, aid refugees, and rebuild what had been broken. The gate closed behind them, sealing a promise that justice could be served without hatred, and that courage and truth were weapons stronger than any fleet. The broadcasts of the truth continued across every system, reaching billions who would remember this day for all time and tell stories of the Resolute, of Captain Arya, of Lieutenant Arman, and of Princess Lisa, who had stood fearless at the edge of annihilation, and in the quiet moments when the stars shone above, and the galaxy was still. Arman whispered into the log that the greatest victories are not measured by ships destroyed or empires broken, but by the lives saved, the voices heard, and the promises kept. The princess looked at him and said, "We are the wake, and the galaxy will remember," and the stars seemed to echo their words endlessly. The end.